Hello, I'm Clara, and my story begins just a day after my wedding. It was supposed to be a time of joy, a fresh beginning, but my mother-in-law arrived at my door with a pen already uncapped. "Let's make this quick," she said, handing me the documents. "Sign over everything your late father left you. You won't need it in this family." I didn't shout, didn't even cry. I simply stared at the notary, the man with his cold eyes and impassive face, realizing that they had been planning this before the vows were even exchanged. They didn't know I had stayed silent for a reason. They didn't know that my inheritance wasn't just about a small family business or a few assets. They had no idea how much my silence was about to cost them. But before we dive deeper, let me ask you, what time are you listening to this, and where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment. I read everyone. The sheet still smelled faintly of lilies and champagne. Mark's arm was heavy across my stomach, his breathing steady against the back of my neck. He was still asleep, peaceful, unaware. I stayed still, eyes wide open in the soft dimness of our master bedroom. The house, our new home, stood silently around us, just outside the quiet streets of Charleston. But even in that moment of supposed bliss, I knew I couldn't ignore the truth. I hadn't told him yet. The sealed folder was buried deep in my suitcase, hidden away beneath layers of clothes. The company my father had built from the ground up, brick by brick in the shadows of Charleston's industrial boom, was mine now, legally, quietly, entirely. My father passed away 2 years ago, just after he stopped answering my calls. I remember standing by his bedside in the hospice, holding his fragile hand and hearing his last words. He whispered softly, "Don't speak of what's sacred until you know who's safe." I had listened. God knows I always listened more than I spoke. No one, my mother, my sisters, knew what he left behind. They believed the company had gone under 10 years ago. That's what everyone thought after he refused to sell it like the rest of the family wanted. But my father never gave up on it. And now, it was sitting in trust under my name, waiting for the right moment. The soft pink hues of dawn were creeping across the horizon when I slipped out of bed. I moved quietly, careful not to wake Mark. The house felt like a still lake, with no sign of the storm that was coming. Today was supposed to be our first morning as husband and wife, a fresh start. I imagined coffee brewing in the kitchen, a peaceful walk around the grounds of our new estate. But instead, I had a feeling in my gut that it was going to be anything but peaceful. By the time I stepped out of the bathroom, freshly showered and dressed, the house had already started to wake up. The low murmurs of the staff echoed down the hall, but there was no warmth in the atmosphere, no soft greetings, no breakfast waiting. Instead, a housemaid appeared at the door. "Mrs. Hart," she said, her voice polite but firm. "Mrs. Celeste is waiting for you downstairs in the drawing room." The words felt like a weight on my chest. Mrs. Celeste, Mark's mother. I followed the long corridor, past portraits of Mark's ancestors, tables filled with expensive crystal. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and old money. When I finally stepped into the drawing room, Celeste was already seated, her posture perfect, her legs crossed at the ankle. She looked up at me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. A man in a dark suit stood beside her, silent, waiting. "Good morning, darling," Celeste said in her syrupy, smooth voice. "Let's formalize your role in the household, just a formality." I blinked twice, then walked towards the table. The man beside her slid a folder toward me. It was already open, the pages awaiting my signature. As my fingers brushed over the documents, a chill ran down my spine. The title of the paper caught my eye: Durable Power of Attorney, Domestic and Financial Affairs. The words were written in legalese, but I could read between the lines. My fingers paused. "This is interesting," I said softly, flipping through the pages like I hadn't seen them before. "Mind if I review it with my attorney?" Celeste's smile didn't falter, but her eyes flickered for a second, the faintest hint of irritation. "Of course," she said, her voice still sweet. "It's just a family thing, no pressure at all." I closed the folder, standing still, my mind racing. I had grown up being the quiet one, the overlooked daughter. I didn't argue, didn't push, but I watched. I always watched. And now I could see exactly how they saw me, a sweet little Southern girl who had married into their world of old money, someone with no claim, no value, someone who wouldn't dare rock the boat. Later that day, I played my part perfectly. I smiled at the guests, posed for pictures, wrote thank you notes. By sunset, Mark and I were back in the guest wing of the estate. He was loosening his tie when he asked, "Did you and Mom talk today?" I didn't skip a beat. "We had tea," I said, smiling as he kissed my head and relaxed into our new life. But as I walked to my suitcase, I unzipped the false lining and pulled out the manila folder, thick with papers and embossed with my father's initials. I held it tightly for a moment before whispering, "Thank you, Dad." The pen Celeste had left behind still rested on the table, uncapped, waiting. The next morning, I woke to the soft hum of the estate. Sunlight was creeping through the curtains, casting long shadows on the floor. Mark wasn't beside me. The bed felt unusually cold. I slipped into my robe and made my way downstairs, hoping for some semblance of normalcy. Instead, there was a note in the kitchen, neatly folded with Celeste's handwriting on it. "Brunch canceled. Some things came up, we'll reschedule." I stood there for a moment, staring at the paper. The fruit tray I had made the night before was gone, along with the champagne I had chilled. The stack of wedding gifts was missing too. "Hey, what happened to brunch?" I asked when Mark walked in a few moments later, his golf cap still on. He gave me a smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, Mom thought it'd be too much. She said she wanted you to rest well. We'll do something next week." I nodded, but inside, something tightened in my chest. It wasn't just the missing breakfast or the missing gifts. It was the way the house felt. The walls seemed to close in on me, and the room felt smaller than it had yesterday. I was beginning to understand that I wasn't just a new member of the family. I was being quietly pushed to the edges of my own life. Later that afternoon, I was folding the last of our laundry when a memory from 2 years ago bubbled up, sitting in my father's garden, listening to him as he carefully trimmed a stubborn rose bush. "Some people love power so much they forget how to love people," he had said. "If you ever get something valuable, don't let them think that's what you are. They'll treat you like a tool, or worse, an obstacle." At the time, I hadn't fully understood what he meant. But now, sitting in this house, watching Mark navigate his world, it felt painfully clear. My inheritance wasn't just about the company, it was about what I meant to this family. That evening, after Mark had gone to bed, I opened my suitcase and pulled out the folder with my father's name on it. The weight of it in my hands sent a sharp wave of cold through me. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered, thinking back to the last time I had heard his voice. "Don't worry, I won't let them take it from me." The next morning, things didn't feel right. It was a strange new day, filled with an unsettling calm. There were no formalities, no warm greetings, no sign of the first morning together that I'd imagined. Instead, Celeste was waiting for me at the front door, a tight smile playing at the edges of her lips. "Good morning, darling," she said sweetly. "We need to finalize a few things." I nodded, my pulse quickening in my chest. I could see it clearly now. Celeste was trying to corner me. She wasn't just my new mother-in-law. She was a force, one with designs on controlling what was mine. As we walked to the drawing room, the heavy scent of lemon polish and wood reminded me of just how deep the old money ran in this family. The notary was waiting for us again, silent and efficient. I could tell this was the next step in their game. They thought I was a fool, an easy target. Celeste handed me another folder, this one titled Asset Alignment and Family Holdings. I glanced at her, trying to mask my rising anxiety. "I'll need to review this with my attorney first." Her smile was practiced, but there was a flicker of impatience behind her eyes. "Of course, sweetheart, just a formality, really. It's just a family thing." It was always a family thing. I could feel it now, like they were laying traps in every corner of this house, hoping I would step right into them. But I had learned to listen. I had learned to wait. They didn't know that silence wasn't my weakness, it was my strength. I smiled at Celeste and stood. "Thank you, but I'll need some time." Celeste's gaze lingered for a moment longer than necessary before she nodded. "Of course, darling, take your time." As I left the room, I couldn't shake the weight of the decision I had to make. I had to protect what was mine, and I couldn't do it by playing by their rules. Later that day, Mark was chatting with some of the guests, completely unaware of what was unfolding. He was easy to read, easy to smile at, easy to love, but there was something dark about this world I had stepped into, something calculated, and I knew in the deepest part of me that I couldn't trust any of them. That night, after everyone had left, I made my way back to the guest wing. Mark was getting ready for bed, his thoughts elsewhere, no idea of the storm brewing around him. I glanced down at my hand, at the wedding ring he had placed there, and realized how little it meant in this game of power. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about trust. It was about control. And Celeste was about to learn that no one controls me. Before I closed my suitcase for the night, I took one last look at the uncapped pen Celeste had left behind. It wasn't for me to sign. It was for her, waiting to trap me, waiting to claim what wasn't hers. But I wasn't going to let her. I wasn't going to let any of them. The next few days passed in a blur of polite conversations, forced smiles, and an ever-deepening sense of unease. Mark was blissfully unaware of the tension that was silently building between me and his family. Celeste, with her carefully cultivated mask of charm, continued to push her agenda, each new move more subtle than the last, but just as clear in its intent. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me, the pressure to conform, to stay silent, to follow their plans. But I wasn't going to play their game. Not anymore. By the third morning after our wedding, I had already begun to put my own plan into motion. I didn't tell Mark what I was doing. He was still preoccupied with work and the details of the life we were supposed to be building together. It was easy to pretend nothing was wrong, easy to pretend that I hadn't already made my decision about how I was going to fight back. I wasn't the girl they thought I was. I spent the morning organizing my thoughts, reviewing the papers, the documents, and the contracts I'd kept hidden. The folder from my grandfather, the one he'd entrusted to me, had been more than just a memento. It had been a key to something far bigger than I had ever realized. The company he had left me wasn't just an inheritance, it was leverage. A shield, a weapon. I had grown up watching my family, my father's side, struggle with power. They never had it. They never knew how to keep it. My grandfather had always taught me to be cautious with trust, to guard what was sacred. I had inherited more than just a business. I had inherited the ability to protect it, and now it was time to start using that power. Mark came downstairs around noon, still half-dressed, carrying a golf bag over his shoulder. "Hey, babe," he greeted me casually, as though nothing had changed, as though his mother hadn't been scheming behind my back since the moment we said I do. "Morning," I said, looking up from my journal. "You're heading out?" "Yes," he replied. "Just a quick game, you okay?" I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "I'm fine, just thinking." He kissed the top of my head and walked out, but his departure left me with a strange sense of clarity. I wasn't going to let him, any of them, push me out of my own life. Not now, not ever. I made my way to the study and sat at the desk, flipping through the manila folder again, letting the weight of it settle in my hands. This wasn't about just signing papers or following their demands. It was about control, about claiming what was mine and never letting go. The phone rang on the desk. It was from a lawyer I'd contacted 2 days earlier, someone who'd helped me with the legal intricacies of my grandfather's legacy. I picked it up quickly. "Hello, Clara, it's Elijah Corbin. I've reviewed the documents you sent over. There's something you need to know." My pulse quickened. "What is it?" "There's a clause in your grandfather's trust. It's something that could change the game completely. It's a safety net, but it requires action." I leaned forward, my heart racing. "What kind of action?" "You'll need to initiate it soon before anyone else tries to take control. You have the leverage, Clara, but only if you move first." I exhaled slowly. My grandfather had thought of everything. He knew they would try to take what was his, what was now mine, and now I had the chance to fight back. I hung up the phone, my mind racing with the implications. Celeste, Mark's mother, thought she had me figured out. She thought I was just another quiet, naive bride who would blindly follow her lead. But she was wrong. I'd been preparing for this moment my entire life. By late afternoon, I was sitting at a cafe, staring at the documents in front of me, my laptop open to a secure legal portal. I wasn't just reviewing the papers anymore. I was getting ready to make the first official move. The next few weeks were going to be a test of everything I'd learned from my grandfather and everything I was about to become. I wasn't going to just take control of my own life, I was going to take control of my future. As I signed the documents, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This was just the beginning, and no one was going to stop me from claiming what was mine. The next few days passed in a strange, quiet tension. Mark continued to be his usual self, completely unaware of the storm quietly brewing under the surface. He was busy with work, with golf games, with the kind of life he was accustomed to, one of privilege, of comfort, of believing everything would always stay the same. But things had shifted, and I wasn't the same person he married. I had begun to lay the groundwork for what was to come. It was subtle at first, carefully reviewing documents, making phone calls, establishing new accounts. The kind of things that seemed like small details, but in reality, they were the foundations of something far bigger. I had been raised to believe that power wasn't just about what you had, it was about what you controlled. And now, I was taking control of everything they thought they could take from me. Mark had no idea. His world was still revolving around his family's expectations, their rules, their traditions. He still believed that marriage was a partnership, a sharing of lives, of love, of assets. But I had come to understand something different. In this family, nothing was shared equally, and if I didn't act, I would lose everything. It was Thursday afternoon when I got the call that would change everything. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. I hesitated before answering, unsure of who it might be. When I picked up, the voice on the other end was calm, measured, and unfamiliar. "Clara Hart?" the voice asked. "Yes," I replied, my pulse picking up. "This is from the law offices of Ellison & Co. We've been hired to review the financial assets of your family, particularly with regard to the company your grandfather left behind." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you need from me?" "We need confirmation of your legal standing in the company. There's a matter of joint ownership with certain family assets, and it's become a point of dispute. We'll need your signature on a few documents to proceed with this review." My mind raced. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for, the moment I knew would come. Celeste's grip on Mark and the family was tightening, and I needed to act before it was too late. "Of course," I said, my voice steady. "Send them over. I'll review them." "Very well," the voice replied before the line went dead. I set my phone down slowly. This was no coincidence. Someone had tipped them off. Celeste's little game was unraveling faster than she realized, but I wasn't about to let her dictate the pace. I had a counter-strategy in place. I spent the next hour preparing, gathering all the documents, all the evidence I had quietly amassed over the past week. Every small move had been calculated, silent, patient, but deliberate. I wasn't just going to play their game, I was going to win it. I could hear Mark moving around upstairs, the familiar sound of his footsteps echoing through the old house. But it was like he was in a different world, one where his family's expectations still ruled his actions. I couldn't afford to live in that world any longer. I had to create my own. The next morning, after a sleepless night of strategizing, I found myself standing in the same office building I had visited a few days earlier. I had made a few phone calls, reached out to my attorney, and set up the necessary measures to ensure my control. My heart thudded in my chest as I walked through the building's familiar entrance, the smooth, cold marble floors reflecting the steady click of my heels. The moment I stepped into the elevator, I felt the weight of the decision settle in. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about power. It was about legacy. It was about my future and making sure that no one, especially Celeste, could take it from me. Elijah Corbin, my lawyer, was waiting for me in the conference room, his calm demeanor offering a small sense of comfort. He'd seen this kind of thing before. He understood what was at stake. "You're ready," he said as I took a seat at the table, the folder of documents already open in front of me. "The amendments are all set. Once we file these, the family will no longer have any claim to the company, to the estate, or to any of the assets." I nodded, my fingers tracing the edges of the paper. "Do it now." As Elijah made the necessary arrangements, I sat back, letting the weight of it all wash over me. This was it. The moment I would take control, completely. No more playing the quiet, overlooked wife. No more letting them think I was just a pretty face with nothing to offer. I had a future to build, and I was going to make sure it was on my terms. By the time I left the office, the documents were filed. The trust was in place. My grandfather's legacy was secure. I was the one holding the power now. Back at the estate, Mark was still blissfully unaware of what had just transpired. He greeted me with a warm smile when I walked in the door, but I could see the edge of tension in his eyes. He didn't know what I had done or what was coming next, but I wasn't going to tell him. Not yet, not until it was time. That night, as we sat down to dinner, I felt the quiet thrill of victory bubbling just beneath the surface. I played my part perfectly, nodding along as Mark talked about his day. The conversation flowed naturally, but I couldn't stop my mind from drifting back to the future I had just secured. When the meal was over, I retreated to my office, closing the door behind me. I glanced at the sealed folder on my desk. It was waiting for me to make the next move, and I would. This wasn't just about securing my inheritance. It was about securing my identity, my future, and my place in this world. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next day arrived with a quiet tension in the air. It felt different from the first few days after our wedding. There was a weight now, a sense of finality that had settled in my bones. I had made my move, and there was no turning back. Mark was still the same, distracted by work, by his family, by everything except what mattered most. He had no idea how the ground beneath him was shifting, no idea that I had already taken the first steps to change everything. I could feel Celeste's eyes on me, even when she wasn't physically present. The way she watched me with that sickly, sweet smile, always so poised, always so controlled. But I knew the truth. She was starting to see that I wasn't the naive, silent girl she thought I was. By mid-afternoon, as I was reviewing some documents in my study, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Clara. It was Elijah Corbin's voice again, calm as ever, but with an undercurrent of urgency. There's something you need to know. I sat up straighter, heart pounding. What's happened? It's about the asset transfer from your grandfather's trust. There's been a request to freeze some of the accounts. Celeste has been moving fast, much faster than we anticipated. I felt the room close in around me, but I kept my voice even. What do we need to do? We need to act now, before they get any further. If they file these requests with the court, we'll have to go through the legal process to prove the legitimacy of your ownership. It'll be a mess, and Celeste won't stop. I clenched my fist. I had already expected her to make a move. She had underestimated me, just like everyone else in this family. But I wasn't going to wait around for her to try and take everything from me. Not anymore. File the necessary amendments immediately, said, my voice steady with resolve. I'll take it from here. After I hung up, I stared at the stack of papers in front of me. Everything was in place. The moves I'd made, the strategies I'd laid out, all had been calculated carefully. But now, it was time to confront the storm head-on. I waited until Mark left for a late meeting, then slipped into the study and grabbed the folder with all the documentation. The weight of it was heavy in my hands, but I was determined. This wasn't just about protecting my inheritance, it was about taking control of my own life. An hour later, I drove to the courthouse. My fingers gripped the steering wheel and my mind raced. This was it, the final confrontation. Once I filed these papers, everything would change. I would no longer be the quiet wife or the overlooked daughter-in-law. I would be the one holding all the cards. When I arrived at the courthouse, I walked through the marble halls, my footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. I was aware of the stares I received, some curious, others calculating. I had always been the one who kept to the background, the one who didn't make waves, but not anymore. I handed the papers to the clerk, watching as she processed them with practiced efficiency. The final seal of approval was just a formality, but to me, it felt like the final line in the sand. This was my victory. As I left the courthouse, the sun was beginning to set. The city seemed to glow, the streets bustling with life. But I felt removed from it all, detached. I had just made my move, and now I had to wait for the consequences to unfold. That night, as I sat in the quiet of the guest room, I heard Mark come home. His voice carried up the stairs as he chatted with his mother on the phone, discussing business, discussing plans. His words felt hollow to me now, like they belonged to a different world. When he came upstairs, he smiled and kissed me on the cheek, but there was something different about his demeanor, a nervousness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice uncertain. I looked at him, trying to read him. He had no idea what had just happened, no idea how much was at stake. But I couldn't bring myself to tell him, not yet. "Everything's fine," I said softly, my voice steady. "I'm just tired." He nodded, accepting the answer. But the moment he turned to the bathroom, I heard it, the soft hum of his phone vibrating on the nightstand. I reached over, picking it up without thinking. It wasn't like me to invade his privacy, but something made me hesitate. And when I saw the message on the screen, my blood ran cold. It was from Celeste. "She's moving too fast. We need to lock everything down before it's too late." The words echoed in my mind as I placed the phone back on the nightstand. This was no longer just about business. This was about power, about control. They thought they could manipulate me, bend me to their will. But they were wrong. I wasn't the woman they thought I was. The next morning, when Mark was still asleep, I quietly slipped out of bed and went to the study. The documents I'd filed the day before were already beginning to make waves. The request to freeze the assets was being contested. Celeste was pulling every string she could to stop me. but it was too late. The wheels were already in motion. I looked out the window at the soft glow of the morning sun, feeling the weight of what I had done. This was the moment where everything I had inherited, everything I had quietly built was finally mine, and no one was going to take it from me. The days that followed felt like an endless waiting game. The silence between Mark and me had grown palpable, suffocating. It wasn't that he was angry, he didn't even know what was happening. But I could feel the distance between us growing wider with every passing minute. I wasn't the woman he married anymore, and I wasn't sure who I had become either. Mark's focus remained on his business, his golf games, and of course his mother's ever-present influence. It was all so familiar, so comfortable to him, so predictable. But for me, everything had shifted. My life, my future, was no longer just about being a good wife. It wasn't just about being quiet, taking up less space. It wasn't about making Mark or anyone else feel comfortable. I had made a choice. And now, as the dust began to settle around the legal filings I had made, I realized there was no turning back. I was playing a dangerous game, but it was one I had to win. The following Wednesday, Mark and I had dinner with his parents. I could feel Celeste's eyes on me the entire evening, her piercing gaze as she watched every move I made, every word I said. She still believed she had me under her control, still thought I was just the naive girl who married her son without knowing what I was stepping into. But she was about to learn how wrong she was. Dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation. The usual talk about business, family, and future plans. They all played their parts, speaking of legacies and investments, of how family should come first. But as I sipped my wine, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was playing a part in someone else's world, one I no longer belonged to. After the meal, as Mark and his father slipped into the study for a drink, Celeste motioned for me to follow her into the library. The room was dimly lit, the scent of old leather and cigars thick in the air. She was standing by the large window, looking out at the moonlit estate. The silence between us felt heavy. "Clara," she said, her voice sweet but laced with a hint of something sharper beneath, "you've been making waves, haven't you?" I raised an eyebrow, my heart rate quickening. "What do you mean?" She turned, her gaze intense. "I know you filed the amendments. I know what you're trying to do, but you're forgetting one thing." I crossed my arms, trying to mask the unease creeping in. "And what's that?" "You can't win this battle alone. You're just a bride in this family, Clara, a small part of a much bigger picture. You might have the papers, but we hold the power, we always have." The way she said we sent a chill down my spine. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for the entire legacy, the money, the control that had been passed down for generations. I could feel her holding onto that power with every fiber of her being. And yet, I wasn't intimidated. Not anymore. "I'm not trying to win anything, Celeste," I said quietly, my voice steady. "I'm just trying to keep what's mine." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "What's yours? You haven't earned anything. Your grandfather's company, your father's legacy, it's all a gift. Don't fool yourself into thinking you're some kind of warrior fighting for your rights." I held her gaze, my pulse steady, even as I fought to keep my emotions in check. "Maybe I'm not fighting for rights. Maybe I'm fighting for respect, and maybe you should start respecting me." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't say another word. We stood there for a long moment, the tension thick between us. Then, without another glance, she turned on her heel and walked out, leaving me alone in the room. I stayed for a while, letting the weight of her words sink in. I knew this wasn't over. Celeste wasn't the type of woman to back down, not without a fight, but neither was I. That night when Mark came to bed, I pretended everything was normal. I pretended that I hadn't just faced down the woman who had spent my entire marriage trying to manipulate me, trying to control my future. But I knew that everything had changed. The next morning, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Elijah Corbin, my lawyer. "Clara," he said, his voice low and urgent, "there's a problem." I felt my heart skip a beat. "What happened?" "The family's attorney filed a counterclaim against your amendments. They're trying to freeze the assets, claiming that your grandfather's trust was improperly handled, that you're not the legitimate beneficiary." I sat up straight, my mind spinning. What does that mean? It means they're challenging your legal standing. They're attempting to get the court to invalidate your claim. It's a long shot, but we need to act fast. I gripped the phone tightly, my mind racing. What do? We need to file a response, and we need to gather every piece of evidence we can to prove your legitimacy. "This is going to get messy, Clara, but I'll handle it. Just stay calm." Stay calm. It was the last thing I felt, but I had no choice. This was war, and I had to be ready for it. Later that day, I met with Elijah at his office. The walls were lined with legal books, the air thick with the scent of fresh coffee and old paperwork. He was already preparing the documents, his face serious as he handed me the stack of papers. "I've already drafted our response," he said, "but we need to be strategic. Celeste and her team are not going to back down easily. They have resources we don't have, but we have something they don't, the truth." I nodded, my stomach twisting. "I'm not backing down either." "I know," he said with a small smile, "and that's why we'll win." That night, as I sat in the quiet of my office, I reflected on everything that had led me to this point. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. "If you ever get something valuable, don't let them think that's what you are. They'll treat you like a tool, or worse, an obstacle." And that's exactly what I had become to them, an obstacle. But I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I wasn't going to let them take my name, my legacy, or my future. I had spent my life listening, learning, and waiting. Now it was time to act. The days following the filing of the counterclaim were the longest of my life. The court hearings loomed on the horizon like an impending storm. Every moment felt charged with tension, as though the world around me was holding its breath, waiting to see which side would fall. Mark, still unaware of the full scope of what was happening, continued to throw himself into his work. But I could see the cracks beginning to form. He was starting to feel the strain of everything that was unfolding, even if he didn't yet understand why. I, on the other hand, knew exactly what was at stake. It was no longer just about the company or the estate. It was about my identity, my legacy. It was about the future that I was going to build, not the one they had planned for me. I spent the next few days gathering evidence, making sure every document was in order, and preparing myself for what was to come. Elijah Corbin, my lawyer, had been invaluable through this entire process, but now the final pieces were falling into place. I was ready to confront the family head-on. The night before the court hearing, I sat in my office, the final version of my legal response in front of me. My grandfather's words whispered in my mind once again, "Don't let them think that's what you are." I wasn't just playing their game anymore. I was rewriting the rules. Mark came into the office later that evening, his face tense, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the past few days. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet, "what's really going on? Why are we doing this? Why are you doing this?" I looked at him, my heart aching with the distance that had grown between us. "Because this is what it takes to protect what's mine," I said softly. "And what's ours? I'm not going to let anyone take it from me, not now, not ever." His eyes searched mine, but I could see the uncertainty in them. "You've been so distant lately. I don't understand. You're not the woman I married." "No, I'm not," I said, my voice steady. "But I am the woman who's going to stand up for herself. I'm not just some pawn in your family's game, Mark, and I'm not going to sit back and let them decide my future." He took a step back, the weight of my words sinking in. "So, this is all about the company, the money?" I shook my head. "It's about more than that. It's about respect. It's about control. It's about taking my life back from the people who think they can own it. They're not going to control me anymore." I saw the flicker of realization in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he walked out of the office, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I knew the confrontation was coming. I knew that once the court hearing was over, everything would change, one way or another. The following morning, I walked into the courthouse with Elijah at my side. The air was thick with anticipation as we made our way through the halls. The courtroom was already packed with lawyers, witnesses, and of course, Celeste and her team. I could see her sitting there, the same calm, calculated expression on her face like she had already won. But she hadn't won yet. As I took my seat, I glanced over at Mark. He was sitting beside his mother, his face pale. His silence spoke volumes. He was caught between two worlds, unsure of where he stood. But he wasn't the one I was worried about anymore. I was. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. The air was heavy with legal jargon as each side presented their case. Celeste's attorney spoke first, painting a picture of a young woman who had been thrust into a position of power she couldn't possibly understand. They made me out to be an inexperienced heir, someone who had no business running the company, much less controlling the estate. But I wasn't worried. I had already prepared my response. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my heart pounding but my voice steady. Your Honor, I began, I didn't inherit this company or this estate because of my name. I inherited it because of the work my grandfather put in, the years of blood, sweat, and tears he poured into building something from nothing. This is my legacy, and I will protect it, not just for me, but for the future generations who will come after me. The words hung in the air, and I could feel the room shift. I wasn't just defending myself. I was defending everything my grandfather had worked for, everything he had left behind for me. Celeste's face remained impassive, but I could see the faint flicker of frustration in her eyes. She knew she was losing control, and that made her dangerous. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had the law on my side. I had the truth on my side. And most importantly, I had the will to fight for it. As the hearing wore on, the tension in the room grew. The back and forth between the lawyers became more heated, but I stood my ground, my words firm and unwavering. When it was time for closing arguments, I knew the battle had been won. I didn't need to prove my worth. I didn't need to explain myself any further. I had shown them who I was, and they couldn't take that away. The judge deliberated for what felt like an eternity. When he finally returned to the bench, I held my breath. After reviewing the evidence, he said, his voice steady, "It is clear that Clara Hart is the rightful heir to the estate and the company. The amendments to the trust and the asset transfers are valid and legally binding. This case is dismissed." For a moment, I couldn't believe it. The weight that had been pressing down on me for so long suddenly lifted. I had won. Not just the company, not just the assets, but my future. Celeste's face was a mask of fury as she stormed out of the courtroom, but I didn't care. I had finally taken control of my life. As I walked out of the courthouse, Elijah beside me, I could feel the weight of the world lifting from my shoulders. It was over. I had done it. Epilogue, the new beginning. The days after the hearing were a blur of media reports, legal meetings, and quiet reflection. I had inherited everything my grandfather had left behind, but now it was time to rebuild. To make the company my own, to put my own stamp on it. I wasn't just the heir anymore, I was the one in charge. Mark and I never spoke about the events in the courthouse. He didn't know what had truly been at stake, and in the end, I realized that I didn't need him to. I had learned to stand on my own, to protect what was mine. Celeste never spoke to me again. She faded into the background, her influence in the family crumbling as the years went on. I focused on the future, on the legacy I had inherited and the future I was creating. And for the first time, I felt free.